Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Today is Sunday, December 22nd, I think. So it's almost Christmas, and I got a little bit of time this morning. I'm going to grab a saw out of the lineup here and get started on it. So I think you've seen this lineup already. We have an Echo that doesn't run right, a 290 for a minor repair, a mystery saw. Does anybody know what came in a case like that? If you do, just let me know in the comments. An MS260 for service, a Dolmar 420 that doesn't start, an 024 from the dumpster, an 026 from the dumpster, a two-man Hornet, a Dolmar 7910 that won't start, a 260 from the dumpster, and a couple 261s that won't start. This should keep me busy over the Christmas holidays. Right now, let's grab this Stihl 024 that came from a dumpster. Get on my workbench. Hey guys, welcome back to my workbench. My name is Erica, and I am so happy that you're here today. I hope you're ready for Christmas, because Christmas is in 3 days. I'll probably start my Christmas shopping tomorrow, maybe. So we have an interesting one today. We have a Stihl 024 AV WoodBoss. Do you remember a couple weeks ago, we did a video on a Stihl 026 Arctic that was found in a dumpster? Most of you will probably remember that. This saw came from the same place that one did. And in my lineup, I have an 026 and an MS260. All four of those saws came from a dumpster. I have a good friend who understands my sick obsession with chainsaws. So when he sees saws in a dumpster, in the scrapyard, at a yard sale for cheap, he'll pick them up and bring them out to me. So I'm on a mission today to find out why this saw was in a dumpster and to see if I can get it running by the end of this day. So we have a lot of work to do. Come along with me and let's see if I can cut wood with this 024 today. Well, I am on Christmas vacation now. The shop is closed for the next 2 weeks. So I get to work on anything I want. And I'm going to spend my holidays working on a bunch of these older chainsaws. And I'm going to see how many of them I can get back up and running and cutting condition. So what we have here is a Stihl 024 WoodBoss. I did a bit of research on these 024s, and what I could find was that they started building this model of saw in the early 80s, and it looks like they made them, I'm finding some conflicting information, but either late 90s or early 2000s is when the 024 ended. I believe this to be an early model 024, so we're just going to assume this is a mid-80s 024. So let's decipher this information on here. So what we have is an 024 AVEQWB. What this all stands for, AV stands for anti-vibe, which in the 80s, that would have been a sellable feature. Electronic ignition instead of points. Quick stop, which is your chain brake. WB for WoodBoss. The 024 was also available in the Super model, and I have a Super here. It's actually tore apart, and together we're going to rebuild that saw, and here's a top cover off of it. So what we have here is a 2.6 horsepower, 41.6 cc, professional made, magnesium built chainsaw made in West Germany. When the run of 024s ended, they would have been replaced with a saw called a Stihl MS 240, and then after that, they're replaced with a saw called an MS 241. When I first became a dealer, you could buy a 241 brand new here in Canada, but they were discontinued several years ago. I assume you can buy them in other parts of the world still. Maybe you can buy them in the US, but here in Canada, you cannot. Professional saws in Canada, you would start at the 261 and go up from there. Let's do a little walk around on the saw. Just see externally if anything stands out to us. And then we will start step by step going through this thing and finding its faults. So, one of the first obvious things that stands out is this Stihl badge. Stihl, made in West Germany. Why is the badge upside down? I do not know. That badge is riveted on there, and that rivet there actually has like a plastic coating on it. See that? So, I mean, why would you take the badge off and put it back on upside down? And then I thought to myself, well, maybe they lost it and ordered a new one. But if you order a new badge, the new badge does not say made in West Germany on it. It is just a plain Stihl badge. So I could be wrong here, but I believe this is the original badge for this chainsaw. I just don't know why it's upside down. Is it possible that the factory accidentally installed it upside down? You guys tell me what you think. It's marked up. It kind of matches the patina of the rest of the saw. Doesn't look new by any means. Maybe this is a rare saw. Maybe they put one on upside down and caught the problem and fixed it. Is this the only one in the world? Does anybody on here own an 024 with an upside down badge from the factory? Very interesting. This saw does have the red master control lever. I know there's lots of debate online about these. Sometimes they're red, sometimes they're black. I actually called Stihl one time and I asked them, why are some red and why are some black? And their answer to me was that in some of the early saws, they used red. They just used red plastic, and then at some point, they started using black plastic. This could have been something to do with some safety regulations, OSHA. I was told that a red lever has nothing to do with how much horsepower is under that hood. This saw kind of sits funny on my bench. It's not... We've talked about these metal handles. And that 026 that came from the dumpster in that previous video, remember it had a bent handle? Well, I think this one does too. Sometimes it's hard to see it, but this saw does not sit on my bench correctly because that handle, there is a bend in that handle. That can cause the whole saw to have a bit of a twist in it, because the whole saw is shifted to the shape of this handle. That can be hard on AV mounts. It can be hard on the intake boot. Like the bottom of the saw is not sitting on the table. That top cover is melted there, you can see. Remember a week or so ago, we did a video on an MS260, and he was running it with the muffler loose and hanging off, and the top cover was all melted back. So this could be that this saw ran at one time with a loose muffler, or this thing is just running so hot that it was melting the top cover. Chain catcher looks almost like new. Either this saw has very light use on it, or someone replaced that chain catcher before they threw it in the garbage. that washer, that doesn't have the usual cupped washer that we're used to seeing, but maybe that's original. This is an early model, I believe. I just looked at the other 024 I have here, and it has that cupped washer, but that could be original. I just don't know offhand. You know, overall, I think we have a saw here that doesn't have a lot of use on it. I wonder what it's going to take to get this thing up and going. Something else I noticed about the 024 Super that I'm going to rebuild, that saw was made in Virginia Beach, USA. Well, let's get to the meat and potatoes. Let's check the fuel. Let's see if there's any fuel in the saw. These here are very early caps. You can't buy these anymore. They kind of look like little dials. So let's see if there's any fuel in this. Hopefully there's not. Oh yeah, we got some, I don't know what. There's something in there. Let me grab a cup. So I said a few minutes ago that you can no longer buy these caps. You can still buy caps for your 024, but they just wouldn't be these caps with this nice metal chain. Let me actually just take that out of there. Look at that there. That's the way stuff was made in the 80s. Speaking of the 80s, I was made in the 1980s. Well, there's something in that fuel tank, and I want to show it to you before I dump it out. I want you to see it in the state that it's in right now. Let me zoom in here and get a light. It's red. It's fuzzy. It looks like red swamp water. There's stuff floating in it. Okay, we're starting with a clean cup. Not much really stayed in the cup, just a couple little specks. We will examine that up close here. It does stink. I just put a lid on it to seal it up there. That is not a nice smell. If you've ever experienced the smell of really old fuel, you'll know the smell that I'm talking about. Okay, here is our fuel sample. I've got it in a sealed container. It stinks really bad. And it doesn't look any better. Is there something growing in that? Strawberry lemonade? I'm not sure what I'm looking at here. It could be Echo Red Armor Oil is red. True Fuel is red. Some stabilizers are red. The chunks, I'm not sure. But that there is a horrible fuel sample. Okay, looking down in the fuel tank here, it's actually fairly clean in there. So all of the chunks and flakes came out in the fuel sample, it looks like. I see an aftermarket fuel filter. That thing is garbage. And I see a fuel line that is either aftermarket or possibly had the end cut off. I don't know. Let me pull it out of there and see. We're going to pull that fuel line out. This hook There's the part number for it. And those things are, I would not use an aftermarket fuel filter on my chainsaw. That's my advice to you, is don't do that. And that fuel line, it is cut. I don't know if that's OEM or not. It could be that the original fuel filter rotted off of it and they just cut it and then stuck this on there. All I can do is make my best guess at this. Just going to pressurize that fuel line. And it is leaking. So my connection is good there at the fuel line. So either that fuel line is leaking somewhere or the carburetor itself is leaking. For now, I'm going to put this fuel filter back on. It's no good. This fuel line's no good. It's cut off. It's possible this is an OEM fuel line, but rotted and they just snipped it off. I don't really know. And something's leaking here. So for now, we'll just do that. I really want to hear this thing run, even if only for a couple seconds. I'm going to put some fresh mix in it. I'm not too concerned with this right now, but I will take a peek in there just in case for some reason it did run. Then I would be able to maybe confirm that it oils at the same time. And there is not a drop of bar oil in it, so I'll just put some in it. I think this saw would clean up quite nice. Well, what do you think? You think it's going to start for me? I don't know. Let's find out. I'll meet you outside. And it is -20 or colder here right now. We are in the middle of a major cold spell. I'll see you out there. Amazing. We heard it run. It doesn't run well, but it runs. You see how dark it is? The sun going down out there. It is 3:30 in the afternoon here. I think yesterday was the shortest day of the year. So we're on the other side of it now, but it sure gets dark here early at night. Well, I am so happy that we were able to hear this thing run. I did not expect it to start for us. I can honestly say I didn't expect much of anything. So that was incredible. Well, let's peel back the layers here and see what we're working with. If I'm going to cut wood with this thing before dark, then I better speed up my process here. I don't think I'll be cutting wood with it before dark, but if I don't get to it tonight, we will cut with it tomorrow if we are able to. So that there is a metal mesh winter air filter, meant to run in conditions like what we have out here right now, cold, not dusty conditions. Not meant to run these in the summer, obviously. We've talked about these air filters in the past. We just did a video on an 038. I think you've seen that video already, but if you haven't, we discussed these air filters that have the choke built into them and how important it is that those are functioning. When they come loose that easy, that kind of tells me that maybe a person has taken this off before. You know, maybe the saw has been taken care of. Maybe it's been taken apart for cleaning. Sometimes those are really, really hard to get off. They come off with a snap. And that's a sign that they aren't taken off very often or ever. You can see the melting there. So this saw it's pretty clean. You've seen me take those recoils off and we just find it so full of dirt in there you can't even find the coil. So someone either cleaned this thing or, like I said earlier, the saw may not have a lot of use on it. Let's pull that spark plug out and take a look at it. And we'll take a look down into the engine. That's an NGK. That wouldn't be the original spark plug, so someone's maybe done a little bit of maintenance to this thing. I grab my camera and we'll take a quick peek. So you can see the scoring that has started in there. It's likely from a lean running condition, whether this thing has a fuel issue, an air leak, or both. We're going to find out. Let's do a compression test right now. I took the recoil off because the top cover was giving me a little bit of a hassle, and I wanted to see better and took the recoil off, and then the top cover popped off. So I will pop the recoil back on and we'll do a quick compression test on this. £210. That's a high compression saw. Let's pull the muffler off this. There's a couple T27s. And there's a couple T27s back in there. So the piston on this looks like brand new. The intake side of the cylinder, you've seen some light scoring there. So I'm going to pull the carb off this and do a quick pressure vac test and make sure we have no leaks. Just going to dump the fuel back out of this. And we'll pull that carb off. There's a couple 8 mils on there. To get the carb off of this, it won't come off because that handle's in the way. So let's take that off. There's a flathead up in there to take out. I pulled the fuel line off the carb. It was really stuck on there. That is a Stihl fuel line, probably original. And the other end at the fuel filter, someone had just nipped it off. Okay, So there it is. Tillotson, made in Ireland. I'm going to put my intake block on and block my exhaust off, and then I'll get to my test here. That there will plug our impulse line. Intake and impulse are blocked off. Spark plugs back in. This saw has no decompression valve to worry about. And our exhaust is blocked off. We've got our pressure vac tester. We'll just do a quick test to make sure it's working. Just put your thumb over the end. Yep. Okay, so we're going to pull vacuum first. Then we're going to go to 0.5 bar. That looks good, doesn't it? Just going to move the flywheel. A little bit of bobbing is normal, as long as we don't lose vacuum. Okay, let's move over to pressure. That there looks like it's holding steady. Let me just wiggle things around a little bit. Just watch that gauge. Just move the flywheel. Well, it looks to me like we have a tight little 024 here. Well, there. So about 5 minutes of time to set up for this test. And we now know that we have a rock solid foundation. The saw is tight. We just tested the crank seals, the intake boot, and we have narrowed this down to a fuel system problem. Because we found that fuel line, the end of it was snipped off, probably it wouldn't grip the fuel filter, so someone cut it off and then put that aftermarket fuel filter on it. But this carburetor, we're going to have to open this up and take a look. Fuel filter, fuel line, but that's great news. Fantastic news. So we'll test the tank vent once we've installed the new fuel line. Just going to test this carb quick. Over to pressure. Yeah, carb looks good. So when we tested earlier, when I pulled the fuel filter off and we put pressure to the fuel line and the carb, there was a leak somewhere. We couldn't determine if it was the line or the carb, but it looks like the carb is fine. So that fuel line is leaking somewhere, but it's cut and we're going to replace it anyways. Let's have a look inside this carburetor. Today we'll use the carb stand that Scott sent me from the Greasy Shop Rag. Thank you, Scott. I'll go give this thing a quick external cleanup. I'll be right back. Let's open the pump side up and see what is going on in there. The screen is clean. I thought we'd find it packed full of crap, but we did not. Okay, I'm going to flip this thing over and just check the other side. So I'm not really seeing a problem here. This thing is clean. The screen's clean. There are screw marks on the hardware. So I think someone's been into this. It kind of looks like it's been freshly rebuilt. Like, would you rebuild a carburetor, but then just leave the rotten fuel line in it, snip the end off, and throw an aftermarket fuel filter on it? I bet somebody would. I don't see a problem here. I'm just going to put this back together. I don't see anything that a rebuild kit is going to solve. And the average guy at home right now with an 024 that won't run doesn't have a tillets and carb kit sitting on his desk. So we're going to put it back together and we're going to look closer at that fuel line. Looks good. That fuel line, I think, is our problem. So that is a Stihl fuel line, but somebody has cut the end off of it. Probably wouldn't grip the fuel filter anymore, so they just nipped it off and jammed this thing on it. Now the fuel that I took out of this thing has settled, I want to show you what it looks like. Fuzz. Something growing in there. That's really something, eh? There's a good chance that whatever that is was covering that fuel filter, not letting fuel get through like it should. It is the next day here. I had a bunch of people show up, and then I had a bunch of snow show up. So we've been out clearing snow all day. You're going to see that shortly when we go back outside. So let's get back to this 024. So earlier I did a compression test on this, and we found over 200 pounds of compression, which seems very high. So I checked the Squish. You may have heard this term used before. It's not something that you'll read about in your owner's manual. So when the piston comes up to the top of the cylinder, how close it comes to the top of the cylinder, that bit of space is the Squish. So the smaller that gap gets, in theory, the more compression you'll have. So to measure this, this stuff is soft. I just put a piece of solder wire off to the side, not in the middle. You bring the piston up and you see how much space is left there. So then I measured this, and this measured out at 0.019, which is less than a spark plug gap, 19 thou. So I don't know if that's normal for an 024, if they're high compression, if this is normal. Does anybody have an 024 with this kind of compression? This Squish kind of talk is a person who ports a saw, modifies a saw. That's more kind of things that they would talk about. You're not going to hear me talk about Squish too much. So I took this thing out and gave it a cleanup. It came out very nice. All I do to clean these is I buy this degreaser called ZEP, Z-E-P, and I just mix it according to the instructions in a Windex bottle, spray the saw down, and then take compressed air to it. And then back over here at the bench, I just take a clean rag and kind of wipe the whole thing down. And there's what I end up with. It's not perfectly detailed, but it looks pretty good. This is a very nice little saw. So I've got all my pressure vac tools off of it, and we're going to start reassembly. While I had it over at the air compressor, I blew the fuel tank out so it is clean and dry in there, and we are starting from fresh and clean. So let's put a new fuel line in this. Okay, so there's our new fuel line. That little white dusting on it, I asked about that, and it's just a dusting of powder to keep these from sticking together. These would probably be in a bin of hundreds or thousands with people picking out of it. So it's just, I think, for ease of handling. So there is the part number for this fuel line. I don't know if you can hear that ruckus outside, but Tyler is outside skid steering. He's doing snow removal. So if you hear something loud in the background, that's what it is. Okay, we're not going to use that fuel line because the grommet is too big for that hole. So we're going to use this style of fuel line. There could be another one, but that's what I have here. So that's the fuel line that I'm going to put on it now. That's the fuel filter that I'm going to use. I'm going to put the fuel filter on it right now, and then I'm going to put it in the tank and then just pull it up through. We've got our new fuel line installed. I'll put the fuel cap back on, and then I will test the tank vent right now to make sure that it's working properly. Okay, so I'm hooked up to my new fuel line there, and I'm going to pull vacuum, and it should not hold vacuum if the tank vent is working. I can hear it, and the tank vent is working just fine. Well, I guess we'll start putting this thing back together. Okay, so we've got our carb and handle all reinstalled. Let's put all this back together. When I took this cover off, that piece of hardware was missing, so I will go find one of those. I'll just grease that up. Just an all-purpose grease. Now this drum sprocket does have some wear on it, but I don't have a new one here, and just for testing purposes, this is going to be fine. If this saw is going to be a runner, I'll just order a new one of these. So this drum sprocket does not have that little notch that I usually show you, because this saw oils all the time, whether it's idling, whether it's full out. If it's running, it's oiling. There, all cleaned up, greased. Those are tight because I just reinstalled them. Just give my hardware just a quick check here. I like to make sure that everything is tight. Remember in the video I did about the 361 a week or so ago with the aftermarket fuel line, aftermarket carburetor? And I brought out a box of parts that I bought out of somebody's trunk. This came out of that box of parts. Does anybody on here know anything about these? Well, we're getting close to firing this thing up. I probably will put a new plug in it, but not just yet. I don't want to eliminate that. I want to just focus in on this fuel line and fuel filter. I just gave my air filter a cleanup, so we'll put this back on. So this air filter with the choke built into it, when I choke this, you can see what happens here. See that? Let's put some fresh mix in this and we'll head outside. Before we head outside, I want to show you guys something. So it is Christmas Eve here, and we just received a last minute package. These are heated beds for Tony and Lily. These were sent to the cats from Ron Beatty. Some of you may be familiar with Ron. He's always in the comment section. He always has something really great to say, something motivational. He pushes me to do better and be better. So Ron, Tony, Lily, all of us here, thank you so much for these. I'm going to go plug them in and get them warmed up. I can see Lily right now up on a shelf, shivering in a ball. And I can see Tony in a cardboard box, shivering as well. They're going to really appreciate these. Thank you so much, Ron, and Merry Christmas to you and your family. Well, what do you think? Is this thing gonna run for us? Let's go find out. I'll meet you outside. Well, that little 024 runs excellent. I'm going to put the plastics back on it, and we're going to put a bar and chain on it, and we're going to go outside and do some cutting with it. I was going to put a new spark plug in it, but I don't know if there's a point really. I'd like to see how little I can spend on this saw to get it back up and running. And so far, we're into it. A fuel line and a fuel filter and a bit of time. And then I'm going to put a used bar and chain on it. It did not come in with a bar and chain. So there's our top cover. Just cleaned it up a bit. It's a little bit melted, but that's okay. Okay, I have a used 16-inch bar and chain here that we will install. Well, we are missing the clutch cover. The saw came in without a clutch cover or bar nuts. So that's not going to work very well. I got to go back to the crypt and see if I can find something. That's too bad. So this 024 has the chain tensioner on the front. And I believe from reading on the internet, the very early 024s were front tension, and then at some point they moved them over to side tensioner. I'd like to find an 024 side cover that doesn't have the adjuster hole, but I'll see what I can find. 026, maybe 028 would fit it. I'll go have a look. I'll be right back. So you know that 024 Super that I showed you the top cover to earlier? We're going to rebuild that saw. I believe it to be a newer 024 than this, because here is the side cover off of it, and it is side tensioner, and you can see how it has the hole for side tensioner. So I read online that the first maybe 2 years, 2 or 3 years of 024 production had the front tensioner. So I believe this saw to be like early 80s, 82, 83, maybe somewhere in there. So we're looking at a 40-year-old chainsaw right now. All right, just back from the crypt. Found a couple things. This is off an 038. So 024, 028, and 038s, the early ones that had front tension, all shared a clutch cover. So this came off an old front tensioner 038. It's a little bit beat up. It's got a little crack in it, but that's okay. It'll work for testing purposes. While I was back there, I found 2 little gold used bar nuts for this. And I also found this in that bunch of parts that I bought from the trunk for $100. That is the OEM clutch cover for this, but I'm going to save that for a rainy day. Let's go outside and put this thing in the wood and see how it works. I'll meet you out there. Wow, what a beautiful little saw this is. This Stihl 024 was found thrown in the garbage. And we took the challenge to try to find out why it was thrown in the garbage and what it would take to get it back up, running, and cutting. So if you've been here for the whole video, you'll see that we did a pressure vac test and we found the saw is tight. We also tested the tank vent and found no problem there. We did a compression test. So what we did find is we found a Stihl fuel line that somebody had nipped the end off of. It was likely loose and wouldn't grip the fuel filter. So they cut it off and they put an aftermarket fuel filter on it. This fuel line is stretched out, shrunken. We also took the carb off and opened it up. And I think what we found was a freshly cleaned and rebuilt carburetor. So someone was likely having a running issue with this, took the carb off and rebuilt it, but they should have went a little bit further and replaced the fuel line and the fuel filter, both with OEM parts. In the fuel tank, we also found some red fuzzy fuel of some sort. It looks like something's growing in there. So if they were trying to run the saw off of this, I don't imagine that would work very well. So all we've really done to this saw, besides testing and cleaning, is replace the fuel line, the fuel filter. There was one screw under here missing. I replaced that with a new one. I could have probably went and found a used one somewhere if I had to. And it came in with no clutch cover, no bar nuts, and no bar and chain. So I found a used bar and chain, a couple used bar nuts, and this clutch cover came off an older 038. And then we put fresh fuel in it and some bar oil, and I think that's about it. This is a really nice working chainsaw. It's light, it's powerful. I would be proud to own something like this. So I guess that's it for the 024 that was found in a dumpster. As you can see, Tyler has been working at cleaning up my studio area here, getting some of the clutter out, and I've got some more work to do in here, but you're probably noticing some big changes behind me here. So I am off to make a fresh coffee and spend some time with the kids and with Tyler. So I will see you in the next video. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas, and thank you so much for watching.